December 10, 1963. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense. He signs one classified memorandum. This document does two critical things. First, it permanently cancels the X-20 Dyna-Soar, the U.S. Air Force's reusable military space plane. Second, it secretly approves MOL, an orbital intelligence space station. No one knows it then. But that day, an 8-year bureaucratic war between the civilian NASA and the U.S. military just began. July 1961. John F. Kennedy stands before Congress. He announces a single, audacious goal: put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. But behind the unified facade of the U.S. space program, two worlds clash. One is NASA, the civilian agency founded in 1958, led by James E. Webb. Webb defends a vision of space as a territory for scientific exploration. The other is the U.S. Air Force, or USAF. Since 1960, it has run the Aerospace Research Pilot School, ARPS, at Edwards Air Force Base. This school trains military pilots qualified for space. Its goal: control Earth's orbit as a battlefield. The definitive 2002 history *, the Air Force in Space 1945, 2000 *, from the Air Force History and Museums Program, confirms the two agencies fight over the same critical resources: propulsion engineers, survival technicians, and Cape Canaveral's launch infrastructure. McNamara tries to hold a fragile balance. Until that December 1963 memorandum. The official story, pushed by the Pentagon and the White House from 1963 to 1969, was simple, consistent, and unchallenged. Robert McNamara cancelled the X-20 Dyna-Soar in December 1963 for strictly economic reasons. The reusable space plane, officials said, was too costly for its limited military value. When MOL was publicly announced in August 1965, the press release stated NASA Administrator James Webb had been fully consulted. It framed the military program as a complement to Apollo. Then in June 1969, MOL's cancellation was justified with an objective RAND Corporation report. Automated hexagon satellites, the report claimed, delivered far better cost-effectiveness than a manned station. The transfer of 7 MOL astronauts to NASA was presented as a seamless, harmonious integration, a chance to put their unique skills to use in the civilian program. The government claims the December 1963 cancellation of the X-20 Dyna-Soar was an economic choice, meant to cut military spending. But Robert McNamara's December 10, 1963 memorandum, partially declassified by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, tells a different story. That same document simultaneously approved the MOL program with an initial budget of $1.5 billion. McNamara was not choosing to save money. He was choosing between two military visions of space. Next, the government claims James Webb was fully consulted on MOL before its public August 1965 announcement. But Webb's 1965 internal memorandum, housed in the NASA Historical Reference Collection, tells another story entirely. Webb was only informed of MOL's full scope on the day of the official announcement. His objections about the fragmentation of Apollo's critical engineers and infrastructure were deliberately ignored. Here's what no one explained. Robert McNamara's December 10, 1963 memorandum, partially declassified by the Office of the Secretary of Defense in 2001, was the first irrefutable piece of evidence. This 3-page document did not just cut the X-20 Dyna-Soar's budget. It allocated $1.5 billion to the MOL program in the exact same decision. Next, Webb's 1965 internal memorandum, catalogued in the NASA Historical Reference Collection, Record Group 255. The civilian administrator wrote in black and white that MOL fragments 30% of the propulsion engineers and 25% of the survival technicians Apollo requires. He formally requested MOL be placed under NASA authority. McNamara rejected that request 2 weeks later. Then the March 1969 RAND Corporation report, commissioned by the Department of Defense, it pegged MOL's cost at $1.56 billion, compared to $800 million for the automated Hexagon satellites. But here's what the report did not say. The August 14, 1969 NASA DoD transfer agreement confirms the 7 MOL astronauts, Bobko, Crippen, Fullerton, Hotsfield, Overmyer, Peterson, and Truly, signed strict confidentiality agreements. Those agreements barred them from disclosing their intelligence mission details to their new NASA colleagues. Robert Crippen, in a 1998 interview for the NASA Oral History Project, admitted their arrival was viewed as a military invasion. All these pieces of evidence converge on a single, unshakable revelation. The war between NASA and the USAF was never a war over budgets. It was a war over legitimacy, over who would control America's future in space. McNamara did not choose to save money in December 1963. He chose between two military programs. The X-20 Dyna-Soar was a reusable, highly visible vehicle. It was too easy to tie to an open, public militarization of space. MOL, by contrast, was a spy station disguised as a scientific research program. It fit perfectly with the unified facade of the moon race. The March 1969 RAND report was never an objective analysis. Internal documents from Nixon's Office of Management and Budget, declassified in 2010, confirm the decision to cancel MOL was made in February 1969, before the RAND report was even commissioned. Inference, the report was nothing more than a public relations tool. It existed to justify a political choice, prioritize NASA and Apollo 11, which would land on the moon just 40 days later, for the sake of public opinion. The MOL astronauts were not refugees. They were soldiers of a defeated, but not vanquished, army. Today, this secret war is no longer a secret. But it is still being fought. In 2019, the Trump administration established the United States Space Force. It was billed as the first new U.S. military branch since 1947. But Paul Stair's 1985 definitive study *The Militarization of Space*, Cornell University Press, reveals a critical truth. The architecture MOL first built, the Pentagon running its own classified intelligence space programs entirely independent of NASA, has operated de facto since 1976. That's when the first Hexagon successor satellites entered service. In 2023, the Space Force announced it was funding 12 classified orbital reconnaissance programs. All of them fall outside NASA's control. NASA, for its part, remains focused on the Artemis program, its plan to return humans to the moon. No official from the MOL era has ever testified before Congress about this hidden bureaucratic war. And the vast majority of documents related to MOL's actual missions remain classified. December 10, 1963. A single memorandum from Robert McNamara lit the fuse on an 8-year secret war. It was a war for control of America's space program, fought entirely behind the facade of the moon race. The cancellation of MOL in June 1969 was never an economic choice. It was a temporary victory for NASA. But that victory was never total. The U.S. military kept full control of its intelligence satellites. Today, with the United States Space Force now a permanent part of the military, one question remains unanswered in public. Who will really control America's future in space? Subscribe to The Truth They Hide so you don't miss the next episode of The Secret War for Space.